Hi, boys and girls. It's time for another story again. Our story today is called Close Call. Now, Everett and his father were sitting at the breakfast table. They'd finished eating, but they were kind of just sitting there, not saying anything and resting for a few minutes. And finally, Dad reached over and he picked up his old Bible. Every morning he read some scriptures out of it before he and Everett set off for work. Well, there was nothing unusual about today. Everything had gone just like it always did. Even Mother. She pretty much said the same thing every morning when she sent her son and her husband off to work. And she would say, "Now, boys, have a good day, but you be careful." Well, after that, they went out and they got into their Model T. Everett, he climbed into the driver's seat, and his dad got into the passenger seat. Well, Everett was really comfortable with driving. He'd felt like he'd driven a car all of his 15 years. Matter of fact, he was so comfortable, he put his hand up here on the steering wheel, and the other hand would go out on the throttle of that old car, and he would just calmly drive along. Well, they didn't live too far from where they worked, but when they had gone down their driveway, they went down a long hill then, and it passed some very nice houses. Then it went over the main highway, and then over the train track, and about a mile into the woods. And then right in front of them was that smooth Columbia River. Well, they parked the Model T and they started to do their daily work. It was just Everett and his dad and their helper, whose name was Mr. Close. They'd all worked together for so long. They all knew just what they needed to do and how they needed to finish up everything. So Dad and Mr. Close were working together, and Everett had gone down by the water to work on some machinery down there. Well, by this time, it was about 10:30 in the morning. And Everett's dad called to him and he said, "Everett, come here, please." So Everett put down what he was doing and he headed over to where his dad was. It was a mill that they worked in. And Dad said, "Everett, I want you to take the car and I want you to go back home. I forgot part of our tools and they're sitting on the back porch of the house." Everett said, "Okay, Dad." So he went off and he got in that Model T and he backed up and turned around and headed toward home. Well, it didn't take him long to go that short distance. He got there and he gathered up those tools and he was on his way back. Well, like I said, everything was really the same day after day. The roads that they took to get to work, everything, even that railroad track. They had the train schedule memorized. They knew when those trains would come, and they really didn't need to worry about those trains. Well, as Everett was getting closer, his car, or his family car, was so old that it didn't have brakes on all the wheels. And a lot of the time, if you wanted to stop, you just kind of rolled to a stop at its own pace. Well, Everett, he'd crossed that highway, and he was on his way to the railroad track, and he did what he always did. He looked one way, then he looked the other way. He didn't see anything, so he didn't even start stopping. Well, as he was traveling down to that track, around the corner of that mountain came the steam engine at full throttle. It didn't even blow its whistle. And all of a sudden, Everett, he saw that train. It was coming straight down the track. And he started pushing his feet on the brake. He pulled on the emergency brake, but the car kept going. He could see that train coming. It was chugging, chugging, chugging quickly down that railroad track. Everett was getting worried. He kept pushing the brakes to the floor, pulling again on that emergency brake. And finally, the car started to slow a little bit. And he got to the edge of that railroad track, right along that edge. His car rolled to a stop. Everett's eyes were big as that train went whoosh. The engine went right by him, right in front of his car. He just sat there in terror. And he kind of went, phew, I just missed that disaster, when all of a sudden, the baggage car was coming, and it had steps that went out the side. So it was a little bit closer over the edge of the railroad. And when it came speeding by, it grabbed the front of that car, the bumper, and that car went swirling back and forth with Everett inside. Well, not far from that railroad track, a man lived, and he was from England, and he was out in his rose garden working on it. And he saw that car having trouble stopping. He saw the train coming. He saw the car be grabbed by those stairs and being beat literally to pieces right in front of him. What could he do? And when that train got right by that man, out of the bottom of the wreckage of that old Model T flew a body. It was Everett. And the man, he threw down his hoe and he rushed out to him. And Everett had landed on the ground. And as soon as he hit the ground, he jumped up and he started running. And the man, he ran after him and he stuck his hand out and he put it on his shoulder. He said, "Young man, son, you're fine. Sit down." Well, he thought that Everett must have been badly injured because there was really nothing but parts left of that car. Well, back at the mill, Dad and Mr. Clothes had been working, and all of a sudden, there was a screeching and a horrible sound. And Mr. Clothes, he turned to Everett's dad and he said, "Come on, the train's hit somebody." Well, they had no car, so they started running. Father first and Mr. Clothes after him. They ran as fast as they could go, but they couldn't see through the trees that they were running through. And when they got to the other side of the trees, they looked out, and there was the bumper. There was the cab of that old Model T. There lay the doors and the hood and all manner of other parts scattered everywhere about. But no effort. And by this time, Mr. Close caught up with him, and he went, oh. They could tell from the parts that it was the old Model T. Oh. But the train hadn't been able to stop right away. So it was a ways down that track. And Father, he went rushing over. I imagine he stopped and he looked in the framework of what was left of the cab of that Model T, but there was nobody in there. Then he looked up, and there was Everett sitting with that gentleman on the grass. And Father, he rushed over to him, and Mr. Close, and that other little gentleman, they started picking up his arms and feeling them, and feeling of his legs and his feet and his hands. But all they could find were two tiny little cuts on Everett's left leg. There was nothing else wrong with him. Everett got up to walk with his dad and Mr. Close. And that gentleman, he had recognized Everett because he saw the father and son going every day to work over that railroad track. And he reached up again to Everett's shoulder, and he put his hand on his shoulder, and he said, "Young man, somebody was watching over you besides just your mom and dad." And Father and Mr. Close turned around and looked at him, and they said, "Amen." You know, many times over the years, as Everett finished growing and became a man, his wife said God had protected him through many, many things. He always remembered how God protected him from that steam engine. You know, boys and girls, God is there watching and helping when we need it. Everett could have easily been killed, but that's not what happened, because there was a God there that made those brakes stop just in time. And when that train caught the bumper of that car, yes, it bumped along and threw that car back and forth, and it tore it all to pieces. But none of those parts ran over Everett when he fell out of the bottom of it. And the train never hit him. God is so good. Thank you so much, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.